Hey everyone, welcome to 8.9 on IXL. That's how the title's coming. Solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So for you geometry people, this is going to be a review. This is what I saw come up the most in what you guys forgot on your circuit training. So I thought this would be a really great first step for us to start with. Okay, so first of all, let me step back. When it says solve a quadratic equation, that's where, so you're used to seeing something like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So a quadratic is when you have an x squared in there, meaning we have a parabola graph or parabola. And what we're trying to find when we solve is we're trying to find our x-intercepts. Okay? Now, if you remember from algebra, you can have at most two x-intercepts, which we have here. You could have one x-intercept, and that's where the vertex of your parabola sits on your axis. Okay, it could be facing up or facing down. That's just one x-intercept. Or you could, so one x-intercept, let me write that here. Or you could have no x-intercept, and that's where the parabola is not hitting the x-axis at all. Okay. So those are the three options, and we'll look at how to solve by factoring. So I'm starting off with a very simple trinomial where the a value is 1. That's your a value. Your b value is 11, and your c value is 18. Okay, just to refresh your memory on all that. So when my a value is 1, the way I like to solve my trinomial by factoring is I make a little table. And I'm looking for numbers that multiply to make 18 and add together to make my middle term, which would be 11. Okay, maybe some of you guys like to do the crisscross or the box method. They're all fabulous, whatever works best. I just do a simple table. Gets to the same thing. So, you can play around. Now, obviously, I'm going to pick the wrong answer first. 6 times 3 is 18, but 6 plus 3 is not 11. So scratch that. You're probably like, it's 9 and 2. Okay, so 9 times 2 is 18. 9 plus 2 is 11. So these are my factors, and I'd write it in factored form, which would be f plus 9 times the quantity f plus 2 equals 0. So that's factored. Now, because it says solve, that means I have to go one step further and actually branch off and solve. So I would say f plus 9 is 0, which means f is negative 9. And f plus 2 is 0, which means f is negative 2. Okay, so my two answers would be negative 9, comma, negative 2. It says if there's multiple solutions, separate with a comma. Okay, I hope this is bringing back good memories from last year. Factoring is very important, so this is a really good place to start for us for geometry. So here's my next trinomial. Okay, my a value is 1, which means I can make a simple table where I'm looking for multiples of 21 that add together and make negative 10. So always include the sign that comes with it, okay? Let me kind of clear that off. So let's see, what comes to mind is 7 and 3. Now 7 plus 3 is positive 10, but I need a negative 10, okay? So that tells me I'm really close. All I need to do is go back and make my signs negative, because negative 7 and negative 3 still satisfies positive 21. And then add those together and I get a negative 10. So in factored form, that would be q minus 7 times q minus 3. Now, guys, order doesn't matter. You could say q minus 3 times q minus 7, and you would still be correct and get to your same solutions. So then you would branch off and you would say, okay, so q minus 7 is 0, which means q is 7, and q minus 3 is 0, which means q is 3. Now, maybe you guys are like, Ms. Cunningham, why don't you just take the opposite? If you see negative 7, make it positive, and negative 3, make it positive. Well, yeah, I can, but as they get a little harder, it's not as simple as just taking the opposite like this next example. Okay, so this is when it gets a little harder. My leading coefficient's a 3, so I can't make my simple table. That won't work for you, okay? So we've got two options. The first is guess and check. And then I'm going to do it again, called factor by fishing or by grouping. It depends on what your teacher called it last year. So I'm going to do it twice. If you look, I have the same problem twice, okay? So I'm going to show you both methods. My favorite is guess and check. It can be frustrating because you've got to be patient, but literally you just guess and check. So I know it's going to factor into 2 sets of parentheses, okay, equals 0. And I have to play with the first term and the last term. So for me to get a 3j squared, the only option would be a 3j and a j. That's the only option I can have there. It gets harder if this leading coefficient is an even number or, it has factors, but a prime number makes it easy on us. Now let's play with this 14 here. So for me to get a 14, well, I have lots of options. I have 14 and 1 and 7 and 2. Okay, well, let's see. So 14 and 1, I can be strategic about this. My middle term's pretty big. So I'm going to try 14 and 1. Now, where would I put the 14 and 1? If I put the 14 here and the 1 here, what's going to happen is my 14 is going to multiply by the 3. And that's a pretty big number, bigger than 17. So by an educated guess, it's probably better to put the 14 with the 3j and the 1 on the other side, so 14 is not multiplying by the 3 to get really giant. Now let's talk about signs. Since this is positive and this here's negative, these both have to be negative here, okay? Because 2 negatives are going to make a positive 14, and when you add them together, they make a negative. So now what I'm going to do is so this is a guess, okay? I'm not 100% sure if it's right. It's an educated guess. It's kind of like completing a Sudoku. Now I'm about to check it. Let's see if it's right. To check it, that requires me to FOIL, okay? So let's see. That would give me a 3j squared, which is better, minus 3j minus 14j plus 14. So what I'm checking here is my middle term. Negative 3 and negative 14 is negative 17j, and then I'm just writing down everything else. What I'm doing is I'm checking to make sure this looks like here, which is really messy. Let's clean that up. Which it does. Hooray, that means I factored appropriately. Great. Now I'm not done. That means I factored properly. Hooray. So now let's go ahead and solve. So I'm going to clear all that work just to check to ensure I'm right. Now let's solve this guy. So to solve is when you branch off, okay? And you would say 3j minus 14 is 0, and j minus 1 is 0. So on the right-hand side, j is equal to 1. On the left-hand side, you're going to have a couple steps here. So 3j equals 14 if I brought the 14 over, and then I divide by 3. So j is 14 thirds. I prefer you leave it as an improper fraction, okay? That's pretty standard. Most math teachers like that. That's how they want it too. They really don't want it as a mixed number. And it looks like they don't want a decimal because they're saying integer proper fraction. So it won't even take a decimal. Don't give it a decimal. Working. So my answer here would be 14 thirds, comma, 1. Again, the order can switch here. It doesn't matter which you put first because they're both correct. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is this exact same problem, but I'm going to do it using it's called factor by grouping, or maybe your teacher called it fishing. It's a more direct way, but it's very process oriented. So you can't skip a step, and you have to memorize the steps. Okay, so that's why this really isn't my preferred way, because I'm not a memorizer. I'm more of a problem solver. So this is more like a creative problem solving type. If you just love a process, which is great, and you're great at memorizing, factor by grouping is going to be your thing. Okay, so factor by grouping, and if you see this and you're like, whoa, I never learned this, don't worry about it. Stick with guess and check. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the first and last term together. So 3 times 14, and yes, I'm using my calculator, is 42. Oops, 42. So I'm looking for multiples of 42 that add together and make negative 17. Okay, so here's where I have to play around. What makes 42? Well, I know 6 times 7 makes 42, but that doesn't give me a negative 17. By the way, since this here is a negative and this here's a positive, that tells me both of these would have to be a negative here. But 6 and 7 still wouldn't work. Let me see. What else goes into 42? Oh, well, 14 and 3. And the only reason I know that is because that's what we multiplied in the beginning. And 14 plus 3 is 17. Oh, so let's make them both negative, and that would make this a negative 17. So, okay, it's not as simple as just saying j minus 14 and j minus 3. You can't do that, okay, because you've got this coefficient here. So please don't default into that. I find a lot of people do that. What you do is you drop the first and the last term down. So it would go 3j squared, and you take these two and insert them in the middle, so minus 14j minus 3j, and then bring this last term 14 here. Okay, so what I did actually is negative 17 is just rewritten as negative 14 and negative 3. If you added those together, you'd get a negative 17j. Okay, I'm gonna erase that. I know it's gotten messy, but I just want you to follow all my steps. If you're like, I don't like this method, that's fine. Go to the next one, speed it up. If you're like, oh, I remember this, I loved it, then stick with me. The next thing we're gonna do, oh, by the way, order doesn't matter here. You could have put the 3j first and 14j second. You still would have gotten the same thing, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to group them. Group the first two, group the second two, okay? And then you're just looking to take out your LCD, whatever you can. So the most I can take out of this first set is a j, and then I'm left with 3j minus 14. And then the most I can take out of the second set, you always want to take out a negative if the first coefficient's positive or negative. I'm going to take out a negative 1. I'm left with 3j minus 14. Okay, so this is good because you want these parentheses to be the same, because that is what you're factoring out next. So you have 3j minus 14, and then times the quantity j minus 1. Okay, so then that's where you would branch off. And you would say 3j minus 14 is 0. So that's where j would equal 14 thirds. And then you would say j minus 1 is 0. And that's where j would equal 1. So those are the same answers we got above. Look, hooray, just a different method. As you can see, factor by grouping doesn't really require like the guess and check process. You just go. But it's very procedural. So that's your choice, okay? Just whatever gets you to the right answer is great by me. So here we have another one. Maybe you do this on your own, pause it, and then push play when you're ready. Use any method you want. All right, hopefully you finished and solved it and you're checking your answers now. So guys, I'm gonna do the guess and check method. It's just, I prefer it, so let's go for it. So I know it's gonna be 2 sets of parentheses, okay? To build the 7k squared, that would be a 7k and a k. To build a 6, well, I have 6 and 1 and 2 and 3. So those are my options, okay? To be quite honest on this one, I'm going to just stick in a 6 and a 1 and see how close I get to it, okay? Because this is positive and this one here is negative, that tells me these are both negative here. Okay, this was a very blind guess. Oop, I don't know what just happened there. Undo. Okay, this is a very blind guess, and let's see how close I am. So 7k squared, so now I'm checking. Minus 7k minus 6k, so I'm checking my middle term. That is not negative 23, so stop. I'm going back to the drawing board. So maybe my 6 and 1s should switch, okay? So maybe I'm going to put my 6 here and my 1 here. So then this would give me 7k squared minus 42k minus k. Okay, that is not negative 23. So that tells me 6 and 1, any variation of that does not work, okay? So I'm back to the drawing board again. This is why a pencil and eraser is nice, or like me, an Apple Pencil. So let's try 2 and 3. So I got a 2 here and a 3 here. Let's see what that gives me. And I just put it in there. I'm like, I don't really feel like being educated on this. I'm just sticking numbers in. I'm going to check it. 7k squared minus 21k minus 2k. 21 and negative 2 is a negative 23. Hooray! We got it. We factored it. It only took me 3 tries. You just got to be patient. So it's factored, and now let's solve it. So 7k minus 2 is 0. Add 2. 7k is equal to 2. Divided by 7, k is 2 sevenths. Boop. And then the other side is k minus 3 is 0, so k is equal to 3. Hooray. Okay, so this one is a little more interesting because, yes, your leading coefficient is not 1, but these 3 terms have something in common. You can actually factor out a 3 from the beginning. We call that a GCF, greatest common factor. So I'm going to pull a 3 out from the very beginning. Whoops. So if I took a 3 out, that would give me 2j squared plus 3j minus 9. So now what I'm left to factor is here, okay? And so let's see, I'm going to do guess and check. So it's 2 sets of parentheses. The only way to build a 2j squared is 2j and j. And now to build a 9 would be 9 and 1 or 3 and 3. This middle term's pretty small, so I'm going to try 3 and 3. And let's see where we get with that. So a 3 and a 3. Now, because this here sign, it's a negative 9, that tells me one's positive and one's negative. And let's see how we get with that, okay? Now I'm just going to check it. I don't know which one's positive or negative. I'll determine that after I check it. So let's see, that's a 2j squared plus 6j minus 3j. Wait a minute. Did I forget a 3 here? I did, because 3 times 3 is 9. Okay. And then minus 3j and then minus 9. So check your middle term here, and that's a positive 3j. Yay! Wow, we got it on the first try. And guys, honestly, I just kind of stick numbers in and I rely on my check to make sure it works. So since it worked, oops, 2j squared. Now, shoot, did I just erased my answer here. I'm undoing. I want my answer. All right. So keep our answer, and then let's go ahead and solve. So that was a j. Okay, so now we branch off and solve. So guys, technically there's 3 factors. 3 equals 0, 2j minus 3 is 0, and j plus 3 is 0. Now listen, 3 does not equal 0. There's no variable here, so there's no solution there. I just wanted to refresh your memory on that. This one would be 2j equals 3, divided by 2, j is 3 halves. Okay. And then this one would be j is negative 3. So I've got my 2 answers, 3 halves and negative 3. Okay, let's keep moving. Now this is a special one with just 2 terms. Okay, it's still a quadratic because you've got a quantity or a squared, so it's still going to make a parabola, but it's just 2 terms. There's no c value. So the very first thing I want to do is take out as much as I possibly can, my GCF. Let me see, I can definitely take out a p and a 4. So let's take out a 4p, which leaves me left with 15p plus 4 is 0. Well, look at, oh, that's not a p, that's a p. Looks like I wrote a j. So I have an eraser. Let's make that nicer. 4p. Okay, so how nice. My squared's already separated. So I'm actually ready to branch off and solve. 4p equals 0 and 15p plus 4 is 0. Divide by 4 on this case, p is 0. Oh, I love a good 0. And then on this side, 15p is negative 4. Divide by 15, p is negative 4/15. Hooray! Okay. Here's another one with 2. Maybe you pause it and try this one on your own and push play when you're ready. Okay, so the first thing is take out the GCF. 37 is prime, so 17. So the only GCF I can take out is a D, but that's good because then I'm left with 37D minus 17. The best part is that my D's got separated. Once you're able to undo the squared, Guys, in factored form, you're ready to solve. So D equals 0, and then 37D minus 17 equals 0. Let's add 17. 37D is 17. Divide by 37. D is 17 over 37. Of course, we would reduce if we can. You always reduce fractions when possible. All right, that is the end to our factoring refresher, okay? Now you can start your IXL homework. And guys, as always, email me if you have any questions. I am always happy and here to help. Good luck and have fun.